Okay, so welcome. Our topic is when Harav Ovadia Yosef Zatzal redeemed a firstborn donkey in 5755, which is 1995. Tafshin Nun Hey. Um, the in Yabia Omer Chelek Yud, it's Simon Lamed Aleph. So Rav dated the 20th of Sivan, Tafshin Nun Hey. So Rav Ovadia Yosef Zatzal um, shares his experiences of a pidyon peter chamor that he did um, in the south of Israel. I just have to share my own personal experience on this topic. There was a Talmud in our shir in yeshiva and Chappelle's. So one day he wasn't there. The next day I said, "Oh, I just said just come." I said, "Oh, we missed you yesterday. I hope everything okay." What he said, "Yeah, I went up north to buy a pregnant donkey." So that was the first time I ever heard such a in my teaching years. The first time I ever heard that interesting um, excuse for not coming. It's right up there with the dog ate my homework. So sure enough, this fellow was part of a group that was organizing a Pidyon Petach Hamor, redeeming of a firstborn donkey, in Beit Shemesh, and I took the kids. They announced there's now going to be a Pidyon Petach Hamor in Beit Shemesh in Park Ayalon, and people came from all over, and they brought in Rav Simcha Cohen Cook of Rehovot. It was of course a Cohen Cook, and he did the Petr Chabor in public. So Rav Ovadia was invited to a moshav in the south, moshav Klachim, and let's have a look at the tshuva. I'll just enlarge it a little bit. Yeah. So listen to this. Moshav Klachim b'mamad chameshet alafim mitoshvei asviva. There were 5,000 people there. It was the week of Parshas Korach, so it was Ach Padot Tiftet Bechor Adam Vet Bechora Beima Tmeima. What non-kosher animal gets redemption? Only the donkey, Tiftet. So he said, Nitkabati al de chavera moitza datit asher nolad lo be'edro chamor bechor lekaya mitzvat pidyon peter chamor. So as somebody on the moitza datit down there, the religious council, so he actually had donkeys, and he had a firstborn donkey that was born, and he invited Rav Ovadia for the pidyon peter chamor. Now, um, Rav Rav Ovadia wanted to do the mitzvah with his own, it being his own donkey. Right now, it's the Chavera Moitza's donkey, so he wanted to buy it. But that's not simple. Why? Because as the Mishnah says, Peter Chamor, a firstborn donkey, before it's redeemed, is prohibited to derive benefit from, and it's one of a list of things that are asurim bana, things that are prohibited to derive benefit from, that if you're mekadesh a woman with it, Eina Mekudesha, she's not married. So let's say a guy to the wedding didn't bring a ring that he bought with his own money, like in every wedding nowadays, but instead he brought a donkey to the wedding, and it was the firstborn donkey of its mother, and and he said to the woman, Hareat Mekudeshes be Peter Chamor Zeh Kedas Moshe Yisrael, so she would not be Mekudeshes because it's prohibited to derive benefit from it. Now, and that's the way the Torah sets it up, that it's prohibited to derive benefit of it until you do the pidyon, until you redeem it. Now, this is a Gemara in Kedushin and a Gemara in Bechoros, which is a machlokas Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon holds its mutter, and Rabbi Yehuda holds its usser. The thing is, we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, as the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch paskin. So following the approach of Rabbi Yehuda, again, Rabbi Yehuda the Gemara has two different approaches. One is an approach based on svara, and the other is approach based on psukim. So in one, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon have an argument, and Rabbi Shimon has a pasuk that dafka excludes a peter chamor from being prohibited. So he holds the pasuk teaches us that it's mutar ba'ana, as opposed to Rabbi Yehuda has no pasuk. So the default apparently is that it's asur ba'ana. And the Gemara has a machlokas in svara about, do you say, what do you model a pidyon peter chamor after? Do you say that, things that require pidyon, and the Gemara works out, what about pidyon aben? What about a human? A human is not prohibited to derive benefit from before you do pidyon, but in general, things before you do pidyon are prohibited. Okay. So that's a machlok, but the way we paskin is a peter chamor is prohibited to derive benefit. So naturally, you would think, well, if it's prohibited to derive benefit, so then the owner wouldn't be able to sell it. And the Mishnah says that if somebody did sell a peter chamor or any of these other isurei hana, you would be able to be mekadesh with the money, because the money is not prohibited. But, says the Ritva, it's prohibited to sell it, meaning the selling itself is prohibited. It's prohibited to derive benefit. Now, there's a din that an estrog of orla is puzzle. Now, orla, first 3 years of a fruit before the fruit is prohibited. So when you plant, let's say you plant an estrog, so those first 3 years, an estrog that is from those first 3 years would be prohibited. It would be invalid. Now, why is it invalid? So the Ravid says that the reason why it's invalid is because it's prohibited to derive benefit. Since it has no heter achila, since it's prohibited to derive benefit, therefore it's not considered, it doesn't have monetary status because it's asur bahana, and therefore lo karinan be'lachem, therefore the requirement of V'lakachtem lachem biyom rishon, you should take for yourselves, meaning there's an ownership requirement on the first day, you don't have that ownership. Okay? So that's our Ravid. Says, so based on that, what Rav Ovadia wanted to do, which was to acquire that firstborn donkey for himself so he would be able to do the mitzvah with his own donkey, again, to find his own sheep, no problem, just buy a sheep. But how are you going to buy the pidyon, the peter chamor itself? Isn't it prohibited to derive benefit? So here he found a note of Yehuda and Rav Ovadia, of course, in his derech, which includes total mastery of the whole range of sources. So not only did he find a note of Yehuda, but he also found a She'ela Shmuel and a Porat Yosef, not Porat Yosef the yeshiva, but the Shilas and Shuvas, and support from the Ran, etc., etc. And he brings a whole group of support that say the following. Since Kevan, I'll read it. Kevan sheyesh lo takana lahatiro bahana yedei pidyon b'seh. This is the kind of an Isser Hana, this is the kind of prohibited, something that's prohibited to derive benefit from, that has a way of removing the prohibition. Lo chashiv kishar Isser Hana, do lo shayach b'hem akna, l'das haravid. If I want to, let's say there's a prohibition of one of the other things on the list, an ira nidacha, something from a city that the whole city was straight after idols, and it's prohibited to ana. That's it. it's gone. Gamarnu. There's nothing you could do. But Peter Chamor is on that list, but Peter Chamor, the Isser can be easily removed. Just take a sheep, redeem it, and then the Isser's gone. So says the Noda Yehuda, as well as a number of other sources, says the Noda Yehuda, the inability to make a kinyan on something that is prohibited to derive benefit from doesn't apply to something where the prohibition can be removed easily through pidyon. And a similar example appears in the run. Rav Rabbi Lazar Akapar, the so he didn't want to lift up some avodah zarah thing until a Gentile, an idolater, would negate it. An idolater could be mevatel avodah zarah, could cancel the avodah zarah status of something. Now, wait a second. Isn't avodah zarah asarbana? Isn't avodah zarah something that's a classic example of something that is prohibited to derive benefit from? So wait a second. If that's the case, ein ba din mammon lischosba. It's not considered of something of monetary value. It doesn't have the status of money. And if that's the case, what was Rabbi Lazar HaKapper so worried about? Because it is something that could be negated, so Rabbi Lazar HaKapper knew that if he would pick it up to be konet, the kinyan would work. So that's another example of something that can be acquired because its prohibition can be removed. Okay. Based on this, Rav Ovadia did a kinyan chalipin. He did the kind of kinyan that you do, let's say, at a wedding when they ask the chassan to be makabel kinyan. So he lifts up a handkerchief or a pen or a kepa or something like that, and through that kinyan, the acquisition takes place. So also Rav Ovadia acquired the Peter Chamor. He also bought a sheep. Ubala keves asher hayasham hu me'achenu beit Yisrael. Ha'il haknotoli gamkein bekinyan chalifin. So he allowed me to acquire a sheep through kinyan chalifin. Have a look at a Tosos, have a look at a Rashash, have a look at a Steichemet. Again, that has to do, as far as I know, about kinyanim. And so now Rav Ovadia owned the donkey and owned the sheep, and he did the Peter Chamor. Now he describes the mitzvah. V'inei mitzvah naset berov per v'hadar. The mitzvah is done with great splendor and with great beauty. Kefi minhag b'Yerushalayim. Diklik minhag b'Yerushalayim u'b'shar tfutzot Yisrael lechabev et mitzvah. Like the common custom to treat mitzvahs with special endearment. Now, anybody who's been at a pidyon ben knows that the baby is laid out on a little pillow that is on a tray, and on that tray people put all sorts of jewelry. All the women at the pidyon ben, so they remove their jewelry and they put it on the tray, and then later on they collect it up again. So plus there's this thing with the garlic and the sugar, another story. So the somebody I thought that minhag was just a beautiful minhag to do it in a beautiful way, in a splendorous way. But somebody shared with the pidyon ben that because Am Yisrael used their gold for the golden calf, so we try to do a mitzvah with the gold. But the over the top is they took the donkey and they put all sorts of silver and gold jewelry on the donkey, and all sorts of silk and embroidered clothing was on the donkey also. So here, this is a decorated baby donkey with all sorts of jewelry on it. When they did the pidyon, lechibuv mitzvah, like it says in the Sefer Nar Mitzrayim at the end of page 134. But he also says beautifully, "V'gam zecha liyotze Mitzrayim, shayutonim kesef v'zava chamoreim min hashalal shel Mitzrayim bevizat hayam." What the Jews had there was so much silver and gold from the spoils of Egypt at the sea, so everybody was carrying these donkeys with the silver and gold. So they actually adorned the donkey. Achar Chakira Drasha, they checked it up very, very carefully. It was 100% a Peter Chamor, no problems. So he says, I made the blessing with a loud voice. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech olam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al pidyon Peter Chamor. He gave the sheep to a Kohen, and who was the Kohen? Harav Agon Reb Shalom Kohen, Rosh Yeshivat Porat Yosef, the Rosh Yeshiva Porat Yosef. Okay, so Rav Ovadia's first deliberation was, how am I able to acquire this? His second deliberation was, do I make shechianu? Obviously, you make pidyon Peter Chamor. Why yes, why no? Well, the Tur deals with it directly, and he says that according to the Smag, you should make shechianu over pidyon Peter Chamor, and according to the Rush, who is the Tur's father, no. Well, that's a Safek Bracha. So the simple thing is, Safek Brachot lehakel, because there's a doubt about a bracha, we're lenient. And we're lenient in the sense of and we don't make it. Rav Ovadia classically is very careful about not making extra bracha, not making doubtful brachas. So the simple thing, if you would just look at the Torah in Yoredea, Siman Shin Chof Aleph, by the way, that's the Siman in Yoredea where everything about Pidyon Peter Chamor is. Shin Chof Aleph, 321. So if you were to just look there, you would walk away and say, don't say Shechianu because it's a Safek Brachot. However, the Bet Yosef refers to the Bet Yosef in Reish Samechei, Yoredei Reish Samechei, which is about Brit Milah, where he talks about saying in Shechianu at a Bris Milah. And the Rambam holds, Kol mitzvah she'ena tadira, a mitzvah that's not frequent. Ve'ena mitzuya b'chol ed, it's not commonly found. Harei yidom l'mitzvah she'iba mizman l'zman. It's similar to a mitzvah that comes periodically. So every year we do Achilas Matzah, every year we say Shechianu. Every year we do the Sukkah, we say Shechianu. So similarly, a mitzvah that every now and then comes around, even though it's not periodic, it's not like you do a Pidyon Peter Chamor every month or every year or what have you. But Mila or Pidyon Aben are the examples, says the Rambam, over them you make the bracha of Shechianu. Now, not everybody agrees to that. And sure enough, if anybody's been to a bris milah in Chutz La'aretz, the common practice, at least in the Ashkenazic communities in Chutz La'aretz, I don't know what goes on in the Sephardi communities in Chutz La'aretz, but the common practice there, they told me, is not to make a shechianu. However, the Shulchan Aruch ends, Shebechol Eretz Yisrael, well, he says it in the Beis Yosef, and then he says in the Shulchan Aruch, that the father, according to the Rambam, makes shechianu all the time. V'chein nagu b'chol malchut Eretz Yisrael u'malchut Mitzrayim v'Suria u'svivateha. That is what is done in Israel, in the land of Israel, in Egypt, and in Syria. Whoa. So that's common practice. And sure enough, nowadays in Eretz Yisrael, every bris milah there's a shechianu. So now, it would follow that Pidyon Peter Chamor should be no different than Pidyon Aben and Milah. And Milah, it's a great example of the Rambam's mitzvah she'ena tadira ve'ena mitzuya b'choles. It's a suffix brachos because the smag says to make shechianu and the rush says not to. But the Shulchan Aruch paskins elsewhere in Reish Samachay to make shechianu out of bris milah. But he doesn't say it here. You would have expected the Shulchan Aruch to say, if he wanted to apply the principle that applies to bris milah and pidyon haben, if he wanted to apply it to pidyon bet or chamor, you would have expected a shechianu here also. So the Shulchan Aruch just left it quiet. And there was a Rav in Yerushalayim, Rav Gagin, and he said, wait, well, because the Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention shechianu by pidyon peter chamor, so better to avoid suffix because it's and better to avoid suffix brachot lahakel and wear a piece of new clothing or get a new fruit so that you definitely have to say a shechianu. Now, Rav Ovadia pulls out a very interesting sveka. Usually we're used to a sveka as you're in doubt whether it's prohibited because of one reason, and even if it's the permitted because of reason A, there's a suffix about some other isser. So it's a suffix. It's a sveka. There's two independent svekas. Maybe it's prohibited, maybe it's permitted, and even if it's prohibited, maybe it's still permitted. So, however, here it's suffix whether you should make a bracha. I mean, even according to the side that you shouldn't, but there's another reason to make a bracha. So he wants to say there's a fake sveka lahachmir to make a bracha. What's the fake sveka? So there's an interesting Rashi. The Gemara Menachos says in Ayin Hey Amud Beis that if a kohen that was offering a mincha, a grain offering, mivarach shechianu. Okay, shechianu on a grain offering, on a mincha. Says Rashi, it's talking about a kohen that never offered a korban mincha in his life. It's the first time in his life he's offering a korban mincha. So he says, a mitzvah that you do for the first time in your life, you should say shechianu. And the Rokeach says this, and the Ramah says this about somebody who does kisoy adam, covers the blood for the first time after shchita, for the first time in his life. And the Kreisi Uplesi says this, and the Tvua Shor says this. The Tosa seems like he argued. And then there's a list of those who say not to say it, and suffix brachot lehakel. Here he still wants to build a sfeik sveika lechumra. However, he says eventually leravcha de milsa, in order to get out of any, to be to not. To do this in a broad way without any doubts, l'rav milsa, in an expansive way, lavashti beged chadash v'yakar. I got a new and expensive garment, and ksheberachti al pidyon peter chamor. When I did pidyon peter chamor, osafti gam birkat shechianu. I added a shechianu. V'kivanti liftor ta beged. I intended that it should fulfill the piece of clothing also. So that's his approach. Okay, so in short, the two halachic deliberations that Rav Ovadia had were, number one, is there a way that I can acquire the donkey so I could do the mitzvah by myself? And he ended up relying on the Noda B'Yehuda and others who say that in Isser Hana, something even though it's prohibited to derive benefit from, if it's something whose prohibition can be easily removed, like avodah zarah that can be negated by a Gentile, by an idolater, so he would be able to. So you would be able to make an acquisition on that Isser Hana, and similarly by a Peter Chamor, you would be able to, because the prohibition is a removable prohibition, so therefore you would be able to make a kinyan on it and own it. Again, it's that's the issue, is deriving benefit from something, making a kinyan on something that that is prohibited to derive benefit from. These are exceptions. Okay. Then he tells you his drasha. And the end of his tshuva, he tells you the drasha that he made at the Peter Chamor. So they ask him to speak. So he says like this. What's the mitzvah of, what's the source of this mitzvah of Pidyon Aben? So there's a Gemara in Bechoros that says that the donkeys, like we mentioned before, helped each and every Jew had 90 donkeys, 90 Libyan donkeys that were carrying silver and gold from the spoils of Egypt at the sea. So again, taken straightforwardly, this is a tremendous amount. Again, if there's 600,000 Jewish males between 20 and 60, and you multiply that by 90, so that's 540 million, if I got the number right. But whatever the case, again, I'm sure I didn't even check it out, but I'm sure there's a Maharal that explains the significance of 90 donkeys, etc., what Chazal are trying to communicate through this medrash. But what Rav Ovadia developed in that drasha is, this is coming to teach us Hakarata Tov for the donkeys. The donkeys carried our wealth as we left Egypt, so we have special Hakarata Tov, and there's a special mitzvah to this non-kosher animal redeeming the donkey. Where else do you find that we show Hakarata Tov to an animal? Well, we find that there's a pasuk that ubasar b'seder trefa lo tochelu lakelev tishlichun oto. You should throw the non-kosher meat to the dog. Okay. Now there's a side of, just throw it to the dogs. But there's a side that, the dog gets the non-kosher meat. It's like a benefit for the dog. Dogs likes meat. Why is the dog being rewarded? Because on the night of Makat Bechorat, on the night of the smiting of the firstborn, Lo yachratz kelev l'shono, no dog barked. It was totally silent. And so in the Jewish quarter, so we have hakarata tov to the dogs, and we give them the non-kosher meat. We have hakarata tov to the donkeys, and we do a pidyon through the pidyon Peter Chamor through the donkeys. But he goes even further again from Rashi and our Parsha. Not only animals, obviously not only people, but not only animals, but also inanimate objects. Moshe Rabbeinu, out of Hakarata Tov for the Nile River, which saved him when he was a baby, he wasn't the person to smite the Nile. So the Shita Mekubeches in Baba Kama, Tzadi Beis Amud Beis, brings Rabbi Yosef Halevi ibn Begash. That's the famous Rimagash, who was the Talmud of the Rif, and the Rimagash was the Rebbe of Rav Maimon, who was the father of the Rambam. So he says, Rabo HaRif Pamachat Chala. One time the Rif was sick. There was somebody who had a bathhouse in his home, and he was there achivri until he was able to be healthy. And the man was very, very, gave a lot of honor to the Rif. But things turned around, as it happens in life, and that fellow that was very wealthy, so he started losing everything and eventually became poor. And he eventually had to sell that bathhouse in order to pay back his debts or support himself. They had to assess the field in order to know how much to pay to to the people he owed money to. So that's usually the function of the Beis Din, that they're the ones who send their messengers to go assess the fields. There's real estate appraisers. Well, the Rif said, Lo adun velo ore be'inyan ha-merchatz hazeh, lo b'mecher velo b'shuma. I'm not able to, I have to remove myself from this case because I have a look at Ariel's comments in the chat. So I derive benefit from that merchatz, and therefore I can't be the one that paskins on the merchatz, on the bathhouse, lefisha naneti mimenu, because I derive benefit from it. Vim zaya bedomem she'ein lo regesh. It was inanimate, and what does a bathhouse feel? So, and yet we still say you should have hakarat tov. Kol shekain v'chavachomer bivnei adam amargish behezek v'toelet. Certainly, a person who can feel negative and positive things, shehauseu yotze mishurat musar b'derech eretz. That and it is. You should, if you wouldn't have hakarat tov, that would be considered a lack of basic derech eretz. What is the deal with hakarat tov for inanimate objects? It does seem kind of strange. I mean, he has no feelings. The Nile River has feelings. The bathhouse has feelings. Even the donkey knows what's going on. The donkey, the dog. They have. It's true that we see dogs with, when you dog owners, they know the mood of their dog, but still, the dog appreciates. It has that thing that it appreciates. It would feel slighted if you didn't appreciate its contribution to Yetzias Mitzrayim, and now it likes the meat, but. So the simple thing is that with a person, there's two aspects of hakarat tov. One is that the person will feel slighted if you don't show him appreciation. And it religiously makes sense also, even though everything comes from Hashem. Hashem chose this person to be the shaliach, to be the agent for bringing benefit to you. That's a person. But still, what's with the dog and the donkey? And what's with the Nile River? And what's with the bathhouse? So there it could be the focus is more not so much on the receiver of the hakarat tov, but on the giver of the hakarat tov, on the one who is showing the hakarat tov, that it's important for him to have a sense of appreciation to everything in Hashem's world. And so it's personal education to have hakarat tov, even on something inanimate. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to share with you. Rav Ovadia Yosef Zatzal, his tshuva in Yabia Omer Chelek Yud, tshuva number Lamed Aleph, about the Pidyon Peter Chamor, the redemption of the firstborn that he did in Tufshin and Hay 57-75, which was 57-55, which was 1995, and it was attended by 5,000 people from the south there in Moshav Klachim. He did do a Kinyan Chalipin and acquired the donkey, even though a Peter Chamor is Isser Hana, but still an Isser Hana that whose prohibition can be removed is something that you are able to be koneh. He also said a shechiyano, but he was careful and made sure that he had a new piece of clothing, even though it's a shechiyano, that you might be able to build a sveik sveika, because it was the first time in his life he did it. Plus, the Rambam holds that Pidyon Ben and Brit Milah in general are, because they're in infrequent mitzvahs, they're like a mitzvah that comes periodically, like as opposed to, let's say, tefillin you put on every day. So you don't say a shechion every time you put on tefillin, but you do say a shechion every year on your matzah, on your sukkah, on your lulav, it's on your shofar. So Pidyon Haben and Brit Milah are like that. And the simple thing would be that you would transfer that to Pidyon Petach Hamor. The only problem is the Shulchan Aruch in Shin Chaf Aleph doesn't mention it. And the Tur brings a machloket, so maybe it's Safek Brachot Lakel. Maybe, though, he says you could build a Sfeik Sfeika, because even if you're not obligated, even if the analogy to a bris milah and a pidyon haben, a standard pidyon haben, breaks down, but still, it's the first time in his life he's doing pidyon petach hamor. And there's a Gemara Menachos that talks about somebody making a shechiyanu over a mincha, and Rashi explains it's because of the first time they had ever did that mitzvah. And sure enough, a number of poskim go with that. However, Rav Ovadia was still careful about that because of the Shulchan Aruch not explicitly saying. So he follows the approach of a Rav Gagin, which was to make sure that he had a new garment, and then of course he had his drasha about appreciation and how Pidyon Petach Hamor teaches us appreciation.